For the next steps in our project, we're going to begin applying value to your contour drawings. So at this point, you should have completed all 6 squares, and I should have already checked those 6 squares. Next, you're going to complete the graphite transfer process. We need to transfer our contour drawing onto the white drawing paper. For your graphite transfer process, remember these are the materials that you will need. When you're ready to use the graphite, make sure you go dark enough so the graphite will actually transfer onto the white paper. If you're unsure whether you have covered all of the area of your newsprint, you can actually hold up your newsprint. If you hold it upward, like looking at it through the paper, like towards the ceiling, towards the light, you can see whether you've covered all the areas that have the squares. So just a quick reminder that when you are ready to actually transfer your drawing onto the white paper, make sure your paper is lined up as closely as possible. If you line it up in a weird way, the boxes will be somewhat tilted. We want the boxes to be completely horizontal together, or they are vertical. You need a few sharpened colored pencils so when you draw over your lines, you know which lines you have already transferred during that process. And when you are ready to create the outline for your box, I do suggest using a ruler so you can get nice straight lines. So after you finish the graphite transfer process, be really careful when you remove your paper. And if you notice that you have really, really dark lines, like this area and these areas, you might need to lighten your lines. I do suggest using a kneaded eraser. Again, you can just do this by dabbing the surface. You can also lightly brush the surface. We're not trying to erase the lines, of course. We're just trying to make them lighter because remember, when we are shading, we don't want to rely on outlines to show the edges of the forms. But at this point, you should see me for another blending stump. This is a teeny tiny blending stump. This is great for shading really small areas of your work, especially when you have all these tiny little details and lines. This is just like your regular blending stump. It's just much smaller. You do clean it the same way, but again, don't use it to blend everything. We really want to use your larger one for blending. This is just for blending teeny tiny areas. So make sure you pause the video to see me for this. Now, after you've transferred all your lines onto your white drawing paper, definitely grab your photo reference because you'll need to refer to this. And you're going to need to grab all of your materials needed for shading, especially your value scale and your hand blot. These two are so important for this project. And you decide what square to begin with. I do not suggest outlining the square right away. We really just want to focus on shading the different areas of value according to your photo reference. When I actually start shading, I'm going to actually probably start with my 2B pencil because it's not too dark, but I'm going to definitely start in these darker areas. Now remember, your value scale has values 1, which is the white of the paper, to 10, which are super dark shadows. So we want to shade all areas of value. Ebony pencil really is meant for our shadows, but if you don't have true blacks in your photo reference, you'll probably just want to go to a value of 9. So when you do start shading, we want to refer to your reference photo and your value scale. What we mean is you can actually take your value scale, you can curl the top because the top part is printed using a printer, just like how this is printed with a printer, and you can actually match your values. So for example, this little value right there, that's probably definitely like an 8 or a 9, while this area is likely the value of a 10, very, very dark. These lighter areas, definitely like values of 1s, 3s, and 4s. So this is when you can really pause to study the areas of value. For example, if I'm going to start in this area right here, looking at this area, I'm definitely going to start with my 2B pencil because I know once I start shading, because I'm going to flip over probably to a 6B, maybe put a little bit of a 4B in here because I need to go pretty dark according to my value scale. And make sure you're shading right to the edge of the square, but you don't need to outline the square right away. because again, that's going to give you an outline too soon. We really want to just shade right to the edge. So now I've got some pencil on there. So now I can take my blending stump and actually start blending to get to that value. And I can already tell I'm going to have to go darker, but also I know I have to actually do a bit of shading around the outside. Now, if you're looking at your photo reference and you see lines, you see details that you forgot to draw, you can still include those in your shaded work. Now, if you're worried about shading outside the lines, of course we want to protect our paper with a hand blot. But you can also take a piece of just straight edged paper. This is just some scrap paper, and you can actually carefully shade, just use a light pressure and shade over that edge, because now it's protecting the paper, right? It's protecting the paper that's underneath. And I can do the same thing this direction here to carefully shade that corner, because we don't want to have to go back and try to fix it later on. And then when I'm ready to start blending using my blending stump, I can go back to this edge here, line it up really carefully, and then with a light pressure, I can shade, shade, shade. So I've been working on my shading to get this super, super, super dark value, which you can see in this area here. I did use the ebony pencil, but then I was really careful when I blended it into some of my other pencils, because as you know, the ebony pencil has really, really soft lead. So if you're using the ebony pencil, make sure you're really using it for those number 10 values. So when you are shading, you do have to watch out for embossed lines. Those are created due to the pressure of the colored pencil when you're doing the graphite transfer method, because it permanently embosses the surface of the paper. So let me give you an example of an embossed line that you can actually see in my example here. So we're looking at this section here on my example. So if you look carefully, you should see a line here, 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 and here. Those are embossed lines. You cannot get rid of them because the paper has been permanently indented. Now I'm showing you this because I'm going to actually have a lighter value here, but I'm showing you what happens when you actually start shading and blending. Now, of course, I can keep shading because I know part of this area is going to be a little bit darker because it's going to fade into this section, but there are ways to hide your embossed lines. One way is to actually shade right to the edge of that embossed line. And then when you start blending, it won't hide the line per se, but it gives your area of value something to sit inside of. The pencil lid kind of gets inside the embossed area, right? You can actually see that happening over here already. There was a line here and here, and I'm going to go in with my kneaded eraser, of course, to lighten this area because this area is actually pretty light. It's like a value of a 2 or a 3, and then it fades into this section here, but there's an embossed line here. So when I start shading and blending, I have to really pay attention to what I can do to remove that, whether it's blending a certain direction, but that's just the dilemma you will run into at some point when you are shading. It's not bad, but we don't want to see those embossed lines later on. We actually want to get rid of them as we are working on our artwork. So a couple random tips while you're working on your shading. Definitely keep referring to your photo reference. If you go too dark, your kneaded eraser is your friend because you can use it to dab the areas that you feel are getting a little too dark. For example, in this tiny corner here, I realized it's a little bit lighter. It's not pure white, but I went a little too dark with the pencil, so I can actually use that to lighten the areas. If you're finding embossed lines, you will have to deal with them, though sometimes you can actually use them in your favor, such as what's happening in this section here. 2 more pieces of advice as you're working on the shading. You can actually use your kneaded eraser to create lines. For example, in my photo reference, I have these distinct lines here in the background. I also have them in this part of the leaf. So I can actually take my kneaded eraser, shape it kind of into this little edge, and then I can actually draw those lines in these spaces here. Also, when you are shading, you don't necessarily have to blend everything. For example, when I've been working on this area here, I actually just shaded. I haven't blended much yet. I might do a little bit of blending of some of these edges just so they actually show up, because this is a very light area in my photo. But you don't have to necessarily blend everywhere, because blending it might actually make the values too dark. All right, I have pretty much finished this square. Of course, I can always go back into it later on. I'm not very happy with how this area turned out, as well as this area. I feel like it's a little unresolved in what I have created so far. I was really trying to pull out this area a lot better, but it's getting kind of dark. So I do know I need to move back into some of these areas, along with in here. This part's just a little undefined here. But as you are shading, be aware we should see sharp edges, but no visible outlines. We should see a smooth gradation of values, which means we should see smooth transitions of value from light to dark. We should see a contrast of values. Again, it may depend on your square, right? This one does definitely have some contrast between the darker gray and the lighter gray. So contrast is not always black and white. Also, don't forget to pay attention to your highlights, which is the white of the paper, as well as the dark areas. When you are shading, it's also a good idea to copy the visible textures, right? Even if you think some areas are smooth, notice the changes of value, right? Notice the different textures that your object has. Now, as you're shading, it's a good idea to look at your work from a distance. What that means is actually taking your artwork and holding it up, like holding it out in front of you so you can look at it from a distance, because sometimes when we keep staring at it so close, we start to lose focus to what we're actually looking at. So what is your mastery check for this part of your project? It's your 6 shaded squares, which is of course graded according to our grading rubric for this project. But this is going to be the last step in our repetition with variation project.